Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to Reason with Science. I'm your host Jitendra. Today's guest is Michael Nelson. He is a professor of environmental ethics and philosophy at Oregon State University. He is philosopher in residence of the Isle Royale Wolf-Moose Project and co-founder of Conservation Ethics Group. With that, I welcome Michael for today's conversation.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so let's start with your interest in philosophy. So how did it start?
That's a good question. I occupy a sort of weird space in that I'm trained as a philosopher. All my degrees, my bachelor's, master's, and PhD, are all in philosophy. But I'm not in a philosophy department, and I haven't been for some time. So I work squarely within conservation science programs, and I think of conservation biologists and similar areas of disciplinary expertise is kind of my audience. But I started at college as a biology major, actually, and was sort of disappointed in it. I came out of high school very excited about biology, and I went to college and they made me take a bunch of chemistry classes, and I'm like, I don't know what the connection is with biology here. And they didn't, I mean, of course there is one, but they didn't make it for me. So I happened into a philosophy class as a general degree requirement, and just fell in love with it and realized that kind of thinking about ideas and concepts was what I was really excited about. So I switched to become a philosophy major, and then eventually found my way back to biology and related areas. But yeah, that's how it started.
Yeah. I mean, it's pretty interesting that now you extend philosophy to environmental ethics, and as a scientist, it's really interesting to think that how much these conversations are important to keep science on track. Yeah, so let's start with once it comes to ethics and morality, we need to understand what are the origins of morality. So, what do you think?
Yeah, well, I mean, there are lots of ways to cut it into different divisions, but a simple way to do it, a common way to do it, is you have some ethical traditions that would be rooted in religious traditions. And then you might have others that are more secular, that don't necessarily come from religious traditions. But one easy way to do it, I think, is to think that, what we're trying to do in ethics is we're trying to figure out what's the right course of action, what's good, what ought we to do. And it's about how we go about making that decision. So do we judge what we ought to do just on the consequences of our actions, just what happens as a result of our actions? Or do we judge our motivations and the rightness of our action based on an appeal to some higher authority? And that could be a divinity of some sort, or it could be, one of the things we hear in conservation a lot is a reference to what we would call natural law theory, the idea that we ought to do that which is natural. So talk about native species is all in a kind of an appeal to naturalness as a way to guide us. Or we could appeal to some other authority. We often think of our elders as authorities that we would appeal to morally. And the last way that we think about what ought to motivate us and justify our actions is we think about, did we do it for the right reason? Did we honor justice? Did we respect the rights of things that possess rights? Or did we act out of a sense of virtue? Were we respectful, caring, kind, compassionate, all of those words and virtues? So there are very different ways that we could think about what motivates us and what justifies our actions. But that's probably the most common way that philosophers divide it up. It's consequences, appeal to higher authority, or motivations that drive us.
Interesting. Yeah. So then what do you think about, for example, can there be a correlation between right and wrong and moral and immoral? Because this is something, of course, philosophers have been dealing with, and especially when it comes to conservation, I think it really matters whether we take the actions as right or wrong, which can be subjective, or it can be moral or immoral, which can be related to the collective success of human species.
Yeah, that's a really great question, because one of the things that we often try to do, not just in conservation, but elsewhere, is we try to get, I don't know, kind of a purity of an answer. We want to say, I did this because it's right and I can explain why and I can feel good about it, or I feel shame because I did something wrong. And it may be the case that in certain, and maybe many scenarios, it actually works that way. What I'm starting to think about conservation, though, and my group has done some work on this, is that we probably have faced for a long time and will certainly face in the future questions and responses that demand action, but there's not going to be a clean right and wrong. Or at least there's not going to be an obvious way to maximize rightness, that most of our actions are going to come as a sort of trade-off between something that's painful or hard or has a wrong built into it and something that's more like that. So we're going to have to find ways to deal with that. Making decisions in the face of like climate change is going to be enormously difficult, and looking for clean right and wrong answers is probably going to be problematic. The phrase that philosophers sometimes use is, when we're engaged in an action where there's no obvious right answer that we can feel good about, we have to make a decision. Every time we do that, people use this phrase moral residue, that it leaves a moral residue on us because it doesn't feel like we did the right thing. And that over time, that residue accrues. And this is why some people eventually just turn away from something like conservation or hard decision making. They can't take it. I mean, that's too hard. And so how do you deal with residue? How do you deal with the grief that comes with that moral residue? I think it's going to be a great challenge for conservation when we think about going forward in climate change.
Yeah. So since you already mentioned that we can take moral values also from religion and culture, the point there is that this evolvability that we need, right? That the fact that the current times are changing with the technology, science, and this is where, is it like, the religion and culture can really serve as moral basis, or they can act as residue of inhibition, to improve?
Yeah, no, it's a good way to think about it. I think we could ask that question of not just the religious ethical traditions, but the secular ones as well. Do they presuppose stability? Do they presuppose predictability, right? If I'm a utilitarian and I'm trying to maximize the consequences, well, that kind of presupposes that I can at least guess what those consequences are going to be, and that there's a stability in the world. So that ethic is sort of built on a notion of stability, which doesn't seem that that's the future we're facing. So an ethic like that might not serve us very well. So we can think of the same thing with religious traditions, right? Do the various religious traditions that have ethical codes, do they presuppose stability, constancy, predictability in the future? And if they do, they might not serve us very well. Other traditions, I think, I've been thinking a lot about indigenous traditions. I don't know whether I want to call them religions or not, just indigenous ways of being in the world. I don't think they do presuppose stability and constancy. I think they have a flexibility built into them because these people lived in a constantly changing world. So I think that's a really great way to think about examining ethical ideas and thinking about what is the future we face, and will they even be possible or serve us very well at all in the future that we face. There are other ways to evaluate ethical traditions, but I think that's a really important one in conservation.
Exactly. And I think one of those, again, inhibitions come from the belief system in general, which can be, of course, the basis can be religious culture, but it can also be in like opinions, which are that you take it as beliefs. And that sort of restricts you to really think wide in that moral philosophy sense, right?
Yeah, people take ethics and the idea of right and wrong, they take it, I don't want to say more or less seriously, but for some, there's a flexibility that's built into it, right? I didn't maximize the best outcome, but I got a pretty good one, and I'm okay with that. And other people, they don't, they're much more strict with what they think that we ought to be doing. So we even have different general attitudes about rightness and wrongness and how serious we take that. One of the things that we've discovered in some of our work is that, collectively, and this has been known, collectively, we're actually very morally pluralistic, that, we have all of those theories built into our moral reasoning, and, and those theories match onto some religious traditions as well. What we've discovered is that individually, we're pretty morally pluralistic as well. So if you ask, we did this work with Isle Royale, there was a proposal to reintroduce wolves. And so we wanted to know not just what people thought, but how they came to that opinion. What moral theories did they use? The theories I just kind of outlined. And what we discovered, we analyzed a set of about 1,000 public opinion comments, and we did content analysis on those comments. And we discovered that even individuals, one individual who's writing what they think will evoke a number of different moral theories at the same time. So we're not just utilitarians or virtue theorists. We're kind of all of those things at one time. And that's not typically how philosophers think about it. We tend to think that, I want you to be a utilitarian, or I want you to be this thing. And we're, once again, humans are messier than we often anticipate in theory.
Yeah, I think so far we've been talking about, these ways which humans have evolved. I mean, reasoning, philosophy, right? But then there can be simply the biological basis itself. I mean, we can go to simply theory of evolution, talk about Darwin's idea, that we have that sort of basis, and we are linked with all the different life forms on Earth, right? So there has to be, again, the evolution of morality as well, right? What's your understanding about it?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Darwin. So if you look at Descent of Man, Darwin has a thought about a whole chapter. I think it's chapter 2 or 3, depending on what edition you have, but about how is it that in this world that I'm describing, which he's aware that people are going to interpret it as everything's trying to maximize its own self-interest and its fierce competition, but how is it that ethics evolve? How does that seems contrary to what he's aware that people are going to interpret evolution as. And he points out that it evolves because it has survival value. We evolve modes of conduct, cooperation, sharing, whatever, because it benefits, it creates group cohesion, which obviously benefits the group, it benefits the individual as well. So from a certain vantage point, the evolution of ethics looks really contrary to just evolutionary theory. But if you think about modes of cooperation that facilitate human survival, like, well, of course, that makes sense. And so one of the things that happens over time is that we have these realizations that we're not only part of this clan, but I see continuity between myself and other humans. And so our ethics start to expand outward. It's not a smooth progress, and we don't all get to the same place at the same time, but this is where ultimately Aldo Leopold, the American conservationist, realizes that that's how we get to a land ethic, is we have to portray humans as part of a land community and realize this is where ecology becomes so important in ethics, because the story it tells is a story of connectedness and integration, and humans as part of the larger biotic community, to use Leopold's phrase. So Leopold, he wasn't an ethicist, but he read Darwin. And so his account of ethics is very biological, and probably what Leopold didn't realize, it's also very consistent with a philosophical theory from David Hume, the theory of moral sentiments, which Darwin did read. Darwin actually has a footnote to Hume in that chapter. So there's a cool continuity, I think, that exists between, and I think there's some other ones too, but this is a cool continuity that exists between ecology and ethics, which we tend to think of as very separate things, but I don't think they're as separate as we think they are.
Yeah, I mean, one idea, it just brings all the life forms together, which is fascinating. And so many scientists nowadays that they are working on other animals, and they come up with this conclusion that most of these properties are there. I mean, as you said, cooperation, morality. So the basis is there. One of the, I think, important thing that we can think of about humans is the ability to reason, for example, right? So in general, to have a conversation, to have a dialogue, to talk to different people and get those opinions. So what's your understanding? I mean, did you guys, I mean, what I know that you've been working with different governments to have these conversations. But did you also have some sort of conversation among like general public?
I mean, that's the conversation about the role of reason is constant. I mean, I teach critical thinking classes. I guess lecture a lot in science classes and talk about reason. And I think one of the things that's interesting is that once you start going down this path, you realize this path of continuity between humans and non-humans. Once you kind of just make one breakthrough, what you start seeing is more and more and more. And to go back to Darwin, the chapter just before the one that I mentioned, Darwin goes through many physical traits of human and non-humans. And he points out that the difference that exists between us is a difference in degree. He's not arguing that anything's as rational as human or whatever, but it's not a difference in kind. And so Darwin, you know, and that's wonderfully, these two chapters go together because he's blurring the boundary that exists between the biology of humans and non-humans, and then he takes on this sort of concept, this conceptual area of ethics. So I tend to think that, at least in the dominant Western world, we have a long history in the last few hundred years of wildly underestimating the world. You know, we've tried to draw this clean distinction between ourselves and the rest of the world, and that it's not just a distinction. We've thought of ourselves as superior and special, and the more that researchers of various kinds really take the world seriously, the more we realize that, wow, we really bought into something that, upon serious, reasonable reflection, doesn't actually seem to be true. And I think that's where we're at right now in many ways, where our worldview, at least the dominant Western worldview, is kind of unraveling in I think, a very exciting way and a promising way. But it's also pretty scary for a lot of people who, whether they're aware of it or not, have really bought into that image of humans and nature is distinct in that way. So it's exciting and terrifying all at the same time.
Yeah, but then what do you think about humans ruling the world? Are we really ruling the world, or still we are in a relationship with the nature?
That's a great way to ask a question. My first reaction is, well, if we're ruling it, we're not doing a very good job, and not doing a very good job even for ourselves in a way. I mean, one of the things we're starting to see is that, you know, because we've conceptualized the world in such a way, it's led us to believe that it can be ruled, it can be controlled and predicted, and it seems like the world has a funny way of suggesting that we might not be right about that assumption. So I think this is a kind of confidence bias. You know, if you believe certain things about the world and certain things about humans, you know, an unconscious bias kicks in that you're super confident in your ability to predict, control, manage, and you know, and it works enough or well enough that it lulls us into thinking that we're really good at it, or we miss confounding variables that really explained why it seemed to work out in our own sort of overconfidence. And then it doesn't work out at times, and we're puzzled. We think, oh, we just didn't do something right. But I think we underestimate the world and the world's interest in being ruled, perhaps.
Yeah. But then, so what about the wilderness in general, the relationship of humans and wildlife? I mean, so many species, they are at the brink of extinction, and we hear this news every day, right? So means somewhere those humans are involved in this, right? To modify the planet in a way. Now, whether it's good or bad, as you said, that we can't really say whether we are good rulers or not. um, so what's your observations on human and wildlife relationship?
Yeah, I mean, the biodiversity crisis is, I mean, it's all of the things that it is. It's tragic, it's unfortunate, it's human caused for the most part, and I don't even want to say it's the result of unwise decision making, because I think from a certain vantage point, if you think the world is here to exploit, control, and benefit you, then it seems perfectly reasonable, and you might not care if species go extinct, because you'll just move on to some other entity to exploit. But for other people, that's not what the world is here for, and species matter, and they ought to be respected. And it's horrifying to think of that alternative vision of what the world is here for. So I think it's another manifestation of this tension that we have. I think of the Western worldview as unraveling in an important way, and we're torn, right? Some of us we can't sleep at night because the idea that we're driving species to extinction is just, there's nothing worse that we can imagine in the world, and other people don't seem to have a problem with it. And I think that difference is exactly, it maps on to, are you comfortable with the dominant Western worldview? Well, then you wouldn't necessarily have a problem. Or are you not comfortable with it? Then you're gonna have a problem. So I think, for a long time in conservation science, we were comfortably anthropocentric. It wasn't, we wanted to use natural resources wisely, but wisdom is all about, using it such that future generation of humans could continue to use it. And now I think we're thinking of this differently, or at least some of us are. And that's part of we have this kind of division that has emerged in conservation. And I think part of it is just this difference between an anthropocentric, human-centered motivation and justification and a non-anthropocentric. We have both of these things within our larger community, and that's creating some rifts for us.
Yeah, but then, so I mean, one thing is that why, because there is a consensus from the point of science. So scientists know that there is, this climate change is anthropogenic, right? But then still, there is a lot of inhibition in general, like to accept the fact and to take actions. So if we have those different, as you said, that each one of us uses different moral values, moral principles to reach to a conclusion. So what do you think? What is the problem at the heart?
Yeah, this is an important question, because we have, our colleagues in various sciences have been sounding this alarm for a while. They're like, look, if we don't change what we're doing, this is what the future is going to look like. And our level of certainty has only increased over time, and the consensus has only increased over time. So the idea for a long time has just been, wow, we have to make people aware of this, which is really interesting, because it presupposes that if people only knew, they would act. And I think one of the things that's happening there, and we haven't acted. And so we're like, what's going on? Why haven't we acted? Well, I think philosophy kind of explains that you don't get a prescription for action. we need to do something, we ought to do something. You don't get that from information all by itself. And so we've really bought into this information deficit model of behavior change, that if we only can fill in the information, we'll motivate the action. But if you want a prescriptive conclusion, if you want to motivate action, you have to have two kinds of premises. You have to have the factual, you absolutely have to have the factual premises, but you also have to articulate the ethics. What's of value? What's worthy of us as beings? What do we think has value in the world and worth in the world? And once you put, this is what we're doing to the world, and this is how we value the world, and those are things that are incompatible. Therefore, we want to make ourselves whole. We want integrity. We want what we know about the world and what we value in the world to match with what we think we ought to do. We want that consistent, rational package. So I think we need to get better. And I'm not interested in what's the right ethical appeal, because I think we're pluralistic. I think many appeals are fine. We need to get more comfortable with being able to understand, articulate, and defend the kind of ethical or value premise. This is exactly what a colleague and I wrote a book a few years ago called Moral Ground, Ethical Action for a Planet in Peril. And this is exactly the problem that we were trying to remedy in that book is, we asked 100 of the world's moral leaders, Desmond Tutu, Barack Obama, the Pope, we asked them to write a short essay. Why is it wrong to wreck the world? Why is it wrong? Not just are we wrecking it, but what's wrong about that? And when the essays came back, they fell into 14 different categories. So they're in the book, it's like 14 different chapters with a set of 4 or 6 essays in each chapter. So it's kind of parallel pleading. We have many different reasons to fill in that second premise. But I think that the challenge is that we haven't been historically very comfortable with that in the Western world, sort of articulating the value part of that equation. And I think to the degree that we get better at it, then the prescription for action, that we want at the end will become more obvious over time.
Yeah, I mean, even if all these efforts, if we reach to certain appeal that can make people understand the importance of the subject, then comes politics in the picture, which so how to deal with that? I mean, to leave your political understanding aside and think what is important for the humanity.
Yeah, I mean, we'd like to think that people that we put in positions of power and authority have the will or the good of the collective in mind. Otherwise, why would we give them why would we allow them to occupy those positions? And I think, unfortunately, what's happened is they don't. They have the interests of themselves and a small collection of individuals in mind. So that's one of the problems we have, is that whole argument I laid out presupposes that those who are in power are interested in acting on behalf of the good of the whole. And I think that's just not true. They're often not, and they maybe even these days seldom are. So we have a political problem. There's no doubt about it. And it's something we very seriously need to attend to, that we're putting the wrong people or the wrong kinds of people in positions of authority. We need to think hard about, especially in the face of an uncertain future, what do the leaders of the future look like? What qualities do they manifest? I think if we asked that question and we took it seriously, we wouldn't be putting people in those positions that we are now. No doubt about it. So I want to be, kind of deadly serious about the politics of all of this, because we really are, and I'm speaking, as an American, we're in a really hard place right now, and things could turn out really, really poorly.
I think the other problem with this understanding is that, because I mean, in general, as a citizen, as a human being, part of this huge society, you want to be a skeptic, right? You want to, of course, even if you elect a person which is your favorite leader, still you want to be a skeptic whether he or she is taking the decisions for the good of the society, right? But if we are still tend to leave sort of that skepticism and just follow someone, of course the system will collapse.
Yeah, I think it's there's a little bit of a tightrope walk here, isn't there? That and I totally am feeling what you're saying, because there are people that I really admire and I want to be behind them 100%, and yet I know that that's a kind of a dangerous position. So how do I offer support and be, you know, skeptical or critical at the same time? And I think, you know, to be honest, I think the best leaders, they want that too. I mean, I lead a program right now, and I don't always know that the direction I'm leading in is the right direction. I depend on, you know, my peers, my colleagues, to tell me that I don't think that's the right direction, or yes, that's the right direction. That sometimes when we're leading, we're guessing, or we're moving too fast, or we're moving too slow. So I think that, you know, I think good leaders are looking for that kind of skepticism, not, you know, not just cynicism, right? That no matter what you do is wrong, because that, you know, I think a kind of collective cynicism would be the end of a community as well. But, you know, critical reflection, and I think we also have to recognize that somebody could be trying to manifest the good of the collective, and they could just be wrong about it, or they could make a mistake, or they could mean something different by the good of the collective than you mean. But that's not to say that's not what they're trying to do. They just, you know, we often try to do things and we flub them up somehow, or we mean something slightly different than somebody else means, you know, by that. But you know, I appreciate the point that you want to support leaders without necessarily, you know, being kind of dogmatic, unthinking followers. That's a super dangerous position to be in as well. So I don't, you know, I think there's a middle ground there that good citizens occupy.
Exactly. Yeah. So the other interesting thing is, I think from skepticism we can go to scientific method in general, which is also sort of having that understanding that your reasoning is based on certain logical construction. But then, of course, when the time will come, it may happen that you can flip, you can change, because the reasoning has changed, the evidence which is supporting that reasoning has changed, and you are sort of comfortable to change your opinions as well, right? So the importance of scientific method for the ethics and moral philosophy.
Yeah, no, that's a really important point, because we sometimes, and I think we do it in all disciplines, that we have this sense that we're supposed to, you know, find a position and defend it no matter what. And it's probably one of the reasons I'm not in a philosophy department anymore, because I don't have any problem changing my mind about things. I can read things that I wrote 20 years ago, and I'm like, oh my God, you believed different things at that time, didn't you? And from certain vantage points, they seem reasonable, but I don't, you know, I'm constantly learning new things. The other way to see that is a place where science and ethics connect is sometimes scientific discoveries can have profound ethical implications. So sometimes we, you know, if I think about like a moral community, right, a circle, what are the things that have direct moral standing, that count, have intrinsic value, whatever, and then what are the things that are outside? My sense of what belongs in the moral community can change depending on what science discovers, or what I learn about what science discovers. So if you know, sentience, the ability to experience pleasure and pain, or self-awareness, or language, or, you know, communication, whatever, if that's the key to moral consideration, if that's the reason why something gets inside that circle, well, what are those things? And that's the realm of science then. You know, science can discover that, whoa, these animals that we thought didn't communicate, they actually do, or plants, or, you know, we didn't realize that they were sentient And it turns out that they are. So that's a beautiful place where science and ethics has long overlapped. Actually, the more we learn about the world, the more it challenges not ethics per se, but our application of ethics. Our moral community gets larger or smaller depending often on what we see, uncovered of the world in the sciences.
Yeah, and how important this understanding is. I mean, the fact that at the beginning of last century, there was a movement, women rights movement, which started, and now it's animal rights movement, which is going on, and that shows the evolution of human species in terms of reasoning and argument, and that comes with the science.
Yeah, I just read an article on, I can't remember what society it was. They wrote a charter of the rights of the moon, and trying to make sure that human beings weren't exploiting the resources of the moon. And so they wrote a document of about the rights of the moon. And if you look at countries around the world, and they're usually not wealthy countries, they often write the rights of nature in a general sense into constitutions and things like that. So we're starting to see what I would call a reemergence of that idea that parts of the non-human world, even far beyond animals, have moral standing, and they deserve to be treated with respect by us. So it's this change that we're going through right now, it seems.
Yeah, actually, a few weeks back, I interviewed Andy Norman. I don't know if you know him. So he's a philosopher, and he wrote a book, Mental Immunity. So his work is basically about this reasoning thing, that how much it is important, etc. And so he has this one thought experiment, that just imagine a planet without any sentience. What will morality do there? What will be the role of morality? Basically nothing. I mean, what would rocks do to the pebbles or the stones? So I think it has to be the concept related to this sentience. But let's see. I mean, we can be open-minded.
Yeah, and it certainly involves whether it's sentience or not. It's a great thought experiment, and a parallel one is one that was offered really at the beginning of environmental ethics in the 70s, and it's called the last man experiment. And the question is, there's one more person left on Earth, and they're going to leave on a spaceship, and there's a button they can push that blows up the world, or not push and the world doesn't blow up. As they leave, if they push the button and blow up the world, have they done anything wrong? And the idea was whether you think they have or not will tell you whether you're an anthropocentrist or a non-anthropocentrist. And that for some people, there's still a wrong that can be done, because you're still in a relationship. That last person is still in relationship with the world. And then there are different reasons why sentience could be one, like you're going to kill a whole bunch of sentient creatures, and you ought not to do that. But there can be other reasons why that action could be seen as inappropriate.
Exactly. I mean, since we are discussing about science and sentience, so what's your understanding about animal rights?
If we think about I'll use a generic term, just animal welfare ethics. And it's this question of, do at least certain kinds of non-human animals, do they deserve membership in that moral community? Do they deserve to be, and you can phrase this in a lot of different ways, treated with respect, acknowledged as possessing intrinsic value, whatever. And that historically, what has happened, and I mean historically, because this conversation actually goes back to the 1800s. Henry Salt wrote a book on animal rights a long time ago, but it really emerges in our kind of popular discourse in the 1970s. And at that time, it really emerged into two different theories. And one was a sentience-based theory, right? That we ought not to unnecessarily inflict misery on things that are sentient. So that's Peter Singer's position, animal liberation, and it's very utilitarian. And the other is animal rights. And that is the idea that certain animals are the phrase is they are experiencing subjects of a life and deserve a right to life, a right to continue to exist. And they might deserve other rights as well. So what's happened over time, though, is that the phrase animal rights has kind of captured all of the different theories, which I totally understand, and that's fine. But there's more nuance in that historically than I think we sometimes appreciate. And you could use some of those other theories that I laid out, virtue theory, I don't know about natural law theory, to articulate that same kind of position that certain kinds of animals deserve direct moral standing. So there are, I think of animal rights as one of a number of ways to make that kind of an argument.
Yeah, but what would be the importance of animal rights in the conservation of biodiversity, for example?
Yeah, so that's a good question, because usually when we think about biodiversity, we tend not to think historically in the sort of Western conservation sense of individuals. We tend to think of collectives. We're trying to preserve an ecosystem, a habitat, a species, a biotic community. We have lots of different words for sometimes different things. So it's conservation, it tends to be very collectivist in that sense. And it's super interesting, because if you look at that chapter from Darwin again, he describes a kind of natural evolution of moral inclusion. And it's like, we value ourselves, we see ourselves in others, so we value them. And then we start to learn about the world, and we see that in non-human animals. And that's kind of where he stops, actually. So Leopold sort of pushes it out to the collectives. So in a way, conservation is in this interesting place where we've skipped that level of moral inclusion. And I realize why. We see it in conflict with the kind of ecocentric, the holistic, that it's collectives that matter. And I think one of the things that we're being challenged on right now is, how do we not do that? How do we wrestle those two things together? How do we acknowledge that, there's a lot of monstrous things could be justified if you said that individuals don't count. So how do we hold on to that and then also be concerned with collectives? Because sometimes we sacrifice individuals for the good of the collective in conservation. In fact, we do it fairly regularly. So it doesn't mean that we wouldn't do that, but how do we do that and fully account for the good of individuals? I think that's part of this conversation right now about compassionate conservation. How do we hold both of those things as important together? And I don't think we have very good answers to that question right now.
Interesting. And then probably we can add something more there, which is another tool coming from science, CRISPR. So modifying the other organisms or the species, either for the biodiversity, for the conservation, or for fun. So what's your take on that?
Yeah, I think this idea of editing nature with CRISPR technologies, it's super interesting because it forces us. I think it's one of those things that's probably more obviously has an ethical component than some of the other things we do. You're immediately confronted with, just because we can does not imply ought. Just because I can do something doesn't mean I ought to do it. And we can think of lots of examples in our daily lives. But this is a great example of, we have the ability to do this. Should we do this? And people have very visceral responses to this in certain cases. So the ethical dimension of CRISPR technology just comes right away, and we're grappling with this. And I think it's a great illustration of how some moral theories would suggest, if you're utilitarian, you might think, well, sure, because the results, to the degree that we can predict the results, if we can do that, then that's how I make my judgment. Other people would think, is this the right way to solve problems? Does it present, does it really solve a problem? Isn't our problem most fundamentally our bad relationship with the world? And doesn't this actually just perpetuate that? Or does it actually solve problems? So part of it even depends on what you think a problem is in the first place, or where you think the problem actually lies. So this sounds bad, but I'm super excited about this because it's so, you have to grapple with the ethical dimensions of it. And I know we go to great lengths not to do that, but it's so hard not to do in this case. It's really quite impossible. So I think it's, it's one of those things that forces us to realize that, science isn't going to tell us, because it doesn't do this. It doesn't tell us whether we ought to use CRISPR technology or not. And we wouldn't even have this conversation in ethics unless the scientists did this kind of work. So how do we collaborate in a way to, navigate our way through all of this and think about this carefully? That's the wrong reason to be excited about CRISPR, I realize, but it is why I'm excited about it.
Right. The interesting thing about it is the use in general. Of course, we can use it in a good way, controlled way, for example, to treat certain genetic diseases, which we know that it's not going to propagate, or since it's you'll apply it on embryo, etc. This thing, but then of course we can use it, especially when we think in terms of modifying wildlife or biodiversity, which is so huge. We don't understand it yet, how these species are correlated, the network of the species in the biodiversity itself. We are still trying to understand those things, right? And if we go now there and start applying CRISPR on top, I think this probably need much more care, right?
And especially, everything you just said, and in the face of an uncertain future. So what it may even be the case that, an application of CRISPR that works now, may not work in the future, or may not be the solution that we think of it as being, because the future is so uncertain right now. So we'd have to, and I think that's just, you have to think carefully about that, right? Is my application of this technology such that it presupposes, the constancy of the future? And if it is, then I need to rethink that.
Exactly. And on the other hand, if it is applied in a controlled fashion, it can help us to reduce this food problem of the world, that to increase the production, or to get better quality food, etc.
Yeah, as long as it's not then used as a justification to create more of us and consume more. So it's always, one of the things that happens is our solutions often allow, we're marching along a path, and our solutions often just allow us to keep marching along that path. So I'm cautiously optimistic about technological or engineering solutions, because I think we have to have them, but I don't want us to think that they're ultimate solutions. They're proximate solutions while we rethink why are we marching along this path, and what's that actually leading us to?
Yeah, and I think this is also important now to connect it with the morality or ethics in science. Whether scientists, they should restrict themselves to explore it, because science is about exploration. This is how we come with new discoveries. So what's your take on this when it comes to ethics and science together?
Yeah, and there's a number of things that we could say about that. One of the things that we should remember is that, ultimately at one point, and not that long ago, we were one thing. There wasn't science and philosophy. It was all different kinds. There was moral philosophy and natural philosophy. And that, this idea of science and the use of words like ecology and science are not, we haven't done that very long. And the reason I rehearse that is because we used to not think of these things as divided. We wanted to understand I think about the ancient Greeks. They wanted to understand what the world was made of and how it was organized in a way to figure out what it means, therefore, to live a good life. And so ethics depended upon understanding the world. And that was the purpose of understanding the world, was to figure out how to live rightly. So it really isn't until recently where we've tried to drive a wedge between those things. And as a result of that, we're not familiar with them. And ethicists are just as bad as anybody. We often do ethics in a vacuum. I've seen talks from ethicists where they'll describe, one of them that comes to mind was a talk on ecological modeling. And the philosopher was offering a critique of ecological modeling until somebody in the audience who was an ecological modeler raised his hand and pointed out that his whole argument presupposed that ecologists thought models did something that they actually don't think they do. And the whole thing just sort of crumbled. So sometimes we do philosophy in isolation and it creates problems for us. And the same is true with doing science without, attending to and thinking about and considering the ethical dimensions of what you're doing. So I think we're all guilty of this, that the system that we've created that divides these things. I ultimately blame that. Because we don't have this familiarity with one another like we used to in the past.
Yeah, and I think that the system also, for example, divides to be a responsible citizen and to get vaccinated when there is a pandemic. So what's your understanding on this thing? I mean, we hear this news, there are so many protests, and there is again clear understanding that the vaccination helps to fight a virus, right?
Yeah, I mean, partly this is, goes back to our conversation about political leadership and the messages that people are offering. But I think I think a little bit of it is a misunderstanding of what it is that science tells us, and is it certainty? Well, no, it gives us, odds in a way. But a wise person is a person who they navigate their life that way. You try to maximize good odds and make decisions based on good odds. I think, I can't speak to other countries, but I think in the US, one of the things that is going on is that it is the quintessential manifestation of this sense of radical individualism and radical autonomy. And it is, it's like it came to a head during this, that there are people who think of themselves as, individual in a way that most people can't even perceive. They're independent, autonomous beings. And that's a really dangerous thing to believe. And in fact, in the case of the virus, that belief in your radical individuality and autonomy could be your demise in that sense. So I think it's, in some ways, and I don't mean to be callous about this, but we are reaping what we have sown. We have told this story of radical individuality and autonomy. And I live in the Western US, so it's even more pronounced here. And some people have believed it and bought into it and laid their identity down along that belief system. And, therefore they don't do things that the rest of us would think of as, just common sense. I don't even have to reflect on it that much to think about it as the right thing to do. So I think of it as predictable if you've really convinced people of their radical individuality and autonomy. And so that in a way that suggests a remedy too, though. How do we get away from that is like, we have to be on guard for, leading people to believe that. And we need to be talking about, and I think this is again where science comes in, notions of integration and holism in humans as part of a larger system and dependent. It doesn't mean we don't have an autonomy. We certainly do. We are unique. Each one of us is a unique circumstance and collection of relationships. but we are a collection of relationships at the same time. So I think in ecology especially has something really important to offer here, this focus on the individual as part of this complex network of relationships.
Right. I mean, I think a few weeks back, I was in a conversation with a friend of mine, and he didn't want to get vaccinated. So this is what and then when I asked him, like, what is your concern? And he said that, no, I mean, it doesn't harm me, and there is no problem. And this is what I said, that it's immoral if you don't do it, because you're not alone in this case. In this case, you are connected with so many people, and that's why it is important for you to understand your moral responsibility in the society and do it.
Yeah, so even if you don't care about yourself, or you think
Yeah.
you're somehow immune, that you're pointing out that that's not you're not fully considering what your decision is about. Was your argument effective?
Well, no. I
I think sometimes those
because
arguments are not, they're not immediately effective.
yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah.
What he said, that he'll go and read more about it and check more about it, because he had other concerns as well, that the vaccination doesn't help, etc. So I told him that, okay, just go through the official resources, because now if you're reading it on Facebook, then it won't help you much, because it's also about what sort of information that you're accessing, right?
Yeah.
Um, Okay, so we are almost at the end. Tell us something about your different projects that you are part of. Conservation ethics group is one of those. So what are the different activities that you are trying to do for the conservation?
Yeah, right now I'm in a kind of a transition phase. I'm stepping down from, I'm the lead principal investigator for a long-term ecological research program that's sponsored by the National Science Foundation. So it's one of 28 sites around the country. And I've been leading that program for almost a decade now, and I'm going to step down from that. So I'm going to go back to teaching more and writing more. I'm also kind of changed over some graduate students, so some of their projects are ending. I'm really interested in a couple of things. One is this connection between science and values or ethics when people make decisions. And I'm especially interested in when land managers make decisions, because their decisions actually impact things on the ground. So how is it, and this is a social science exercise, how is it that they're trading off or weighing scientific understanding versus values that they hold or that they might consider? So I want to essentially understand the manager's mind a little bit. How are they making decisions? So that's one project I'm interested in. I'm actually thinking about a book. I've described my background and my sort of not change, but my path from philosophy and ethics to conservation, combining ecology, social science. So I sometimes jokingly describe myself as over the course of my career, I have become undisciplined. And so I'm actually thinking about a kind of academic memoir called Undisciplined, just because it's a different path. And then I've had this moment to kind of think about it a lot and what I've learned from taking this different path. I'm interested in, climate change is huge. I'm interested in my collaborations. How is it? This is completely unrealistic and naive, but that dominant worldview that I mentioned, I mostly blame philosophers for that. I mostly blame, Renaissance thinkers who looked back on ancient Greek philosophers, and I realized they weren't the culprits by themselves. But I think of, philosophy created or helped create this worldview. How can we fix it? How can we create another one? So I've been collaborating a lot with some of my indigenous colleagues in North America, and thinking about indigenous philosophy and indigenous worldviews as an alternative, and not just reinventing those, but what are the parallels in the Western world that we can breathe life into and allow to emerge. So Yeah, changing the Western worldview is one of my projects right now. So those are the kinds of things I think that somebody thinks about in these transition periods, these larger questions. So it'll be interesting to see what comes of this. I'm not sure myself all that will come of this.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think this will be big, like climate change. You may create another topic for politics if the but yeah, it's really good. I mean, I read some of the essays in your book, Moral Ground, which is interesting. And yes, another book on like from you, it'll be good for the people.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time this summer writing essays that were reflective. Like I wrote a piece for Nature
Yeah.
on, how do you collaborate with scientists, and thinking about, the different cultures and the things that really get in our way, and how can we get over some of these things and collaborate? Because I see, our problems, we might be facing the biggest problems in the history of humanity, and the idea that only part of our expertise or part of our brain is going to solve these problems, it seems really, really dangerous. And yet we exist in these, isolated groups. So how can we get over that and get around that? How do we create different ways of thinking and ask different kinds of questions, and really tap into the full power and force of the human imagination? And I would even go into the arts and creative writing as another important collaborator in this process.
Yeah. One thing I always wonder, why these topics are not included in the curriculum of the high school or something, when you're reading science, when you're exposing yourself to those kind of bigger ideas, to also understand what are their limitations and what can be the result of those ideas. So
yeah, I think some of the papers we write often end with this has really important implications for our various institutions, including educational institutions. So I'm very happy that I have an appointment in a college of forestry, and I don't, I'm certainly the only philosopher or humanist in our college of forestry, but it may be that I'm the only one anywhere. And I was the first, non-biophysical scientist or non-scientist to lead one of these programs. So I take my own story as a little bit of hope, in the sense that, people have realized the value of this, and that it's important. At least some people have, and people in some positions of authority. So I've been willing to take these risks and sometimes be in these uncomfortable places, and and that's one part of it. And then other people have to say, yeah, it really is. We need to be collaborating and being interdisciplinary in a far more profound way than we have in the past, including in our training. Often what we do is we sometimes make our students take classes like environmental ethics even, but we subcontract, right? We have them go over to some other department to do this. But it's very different having those people, in all of our meetings. They're in our departments. Their expertise is part of our conversation. It changes our conversation in a really important way. And I think, I can't generalize from a sample of one, but at least a sample of one shows that it's possible to do something a little different than we have in the past.
Yeah. And what is a message that you would like to give to the scientists who are starting their career, or at the beginning, that they are now sort of, planning to build a career in science, in terms of ethics and philosophy?
Yeah, I mean, there are lots of things I could say, but I think they will find it rewarding. It doesn't mean it's easy to, and I mean, kind of profoundly collaborate with people from other disciplines. I think you will be a better scientist because you will reflect upon your science, to be exposed to systematic critical thinking, for instance, and logic, and the way a philosopher thinks. I think ultimately makes one a better scientist, to be exposed to the creative process that you see with the arts, for instance. And visual arts and writing, creativity is a really important part of doing good science. You can do science, it's not necessarily good science, but being creative is a really important quality for being a good scientist. So I think the things that you can learn from other disciplines, and I really mean a kind of profound relationship with people in these other disciplines. It requires effort, it requires time, it's sometimes uncomfortable, but ultimately, I think you're a better scientist for that relationship if you're willing to put the effort in.
Yeah, I think you touched that really, the key point, because generally once I'm having discussions, this is what my question is, that who is a scientist or who is a philosopher? Because to be a scientist, it's not just to get certain degrees and, as you said, that you can do science, but to have that creativity um, to do new experiments, that creative science. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a way of thinking, isn't it? As much as anything else. And to be exposed to other ways of thinking only expands your imagination and your mind.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. So thank you so much for accepting the invitation. And
Pleasure.
thank
My
you for
pleasure.
sharing your understanding and your experience on moral philosophy.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you so much.
All right, take
Bye.
care.
Bye.